It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. But then again, the dimly lit Victorian living room sat in eerie stillness, snow gently falling outside. The dying fireplace cast faint orange light on the walls, creating long, unsettling shadows. The window panes rattled faintly in the cold night wind, and a plush blanket was draped over the armchair near the hearth. A young woman sat on the armchair, clutching the knit blanket close. Her eyes darted nervously toward the weakly glowing embers in the fireplace. The shadows on the walls seemed to twist and ripple, as though alive. The silence grew louder, stretching into the room like a living thing. The wooden floors and walls amplified the faintest creak or rustle, the darkness in the corners feeling impossibly heavy. The house itself was vast and cold, its Victorian architecture casting an imposing presence even in the stillness. The rooms remained darkened, save for the faint, uneven light of the fireplace. In one corner, the Christmas tree stood decorated but forlorn. Its twinkling lights were dim, flickering sporadically as though the house mourned in quiet resignation. The woman muttered softly, trying to calm herself, her hands gripping the book in her lap. She stared at the dancing shadows on the walls, dismissing her unease as the product of an overactive imagination. But then, from upstairs came a faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic and deliberate, breaking the oppressive quiet. The staircase leading to the upper floor loomed in the shadows, its banister gleaming faintly in the dim light. The hallway at the top of the stairs stretched into darkness, the tapping sound echoing as though bouncing off unseen walls. The woman's breath hitched as she froze, her ears straining to catch the pattern. Her wide eyes betrayed her fear as she clutched the blanket tighter. The cold air felt heavier now, her breath visible in shallow puffs. The living room fell unnervingly still again, but the faint scraping sound continued upstairs. The unnatural quiet of the room seemed to amplify it, making the noise unbearable. The staircase itself seemed to shift under her gaze, the wood creaking softly as though it bore an invisible weight. The darkness at the top of the stairs grew more oppressive, shadows pooling and stretching downward. She stood now in front of the fireplace, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like a shield. Her face reflected disbelief, tinged with growing terror. Turning toward the stairwell, she saw only the darkened void above. The scraping noise grew louder, reverberating through the air, making the silence before it seemed almost preferable. A silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, vague and unnatural, like a figure carved from the very fabric of the shadows. It leaned slightly forward, as if considering its next move. The room seemed alive now. Shadows curled from the corners, growing and reaching out like dark tendrils. The embers in the fireplace flickered wildly, their light too weak to hold back the encroaching darkness. The Christmas tree lights dimmed further, flickering violently. Ornaments sparkled in the erratic glow, their distorted reflections shifting eerily. In her panic, the woman knocked a snow globe off the mantel. It shattered on the floor, its fragments glinting like broken stars. Melted artificial snow spread across the wooden floor, mingling with the shards. For a moment, the house stood utterly still. The shadows retreated slightly, the silence swallowing even the sound of her rapid breathing. The figure at the top of the stairs leaned further into view. Its laugh, low and guttural, rolled down the staircase like a physical force, the sound twisting unnaturally in her ears. Her heart thundered in her chest as she stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug and falling to the floor. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes locked on the figure at the top of the stairs. Its form shifted unnaturally, as though reality itself struggled to define its shape. The Christmas tree lights flickered more violently now, and the garlands trembled as though caught in an unseen breeze. The ornaments reflected warped, sinister versions of the figure as it began to descend the staircase. She dashed to the front door, her trembling hands fumbling with the lock. The metal was icy cold, and no matter how hard she twisted, the latch wouldn't budge. A low, guttural growl rumbled from behind her, freezing her in place. The staircase creaked again as the figure moved closer. Its movements were slow but deliberate, each step deliberate, scraping against the old wooden floorboards. Shadows spiraled out from its feet, snaking along the walls like living creatures. Desperate, she turned to the mantel. Her eyes darted to the broken snow globe, its pieces trembling faintly. An otherworldly hum began to fill the air, faint at first but growing steadily louder. The figure loomed in the doorway of the living room, its body towering and unnatural. It was cloaked in shadows, but its glowing red eyes pierced the darkness like smoldering coals. Its mouth stretched into a jagged, inhuman grin, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, clutching it tightly in both hands. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as she backed away toward the corner of the room. The figure seemed to study her, its head tilting to one side with a sickening crack. The room began to warp. The walls bent inward and the shadows thickened, almost tangible now. The Christmas decorations erupted into chaos. The tree lights burst in tiny explosions. The garlands slithered like serpents, and the ornaments shattered one by one. The creature's laugh echoed again, filling the room with its unholy resonance. She screamed and lunged forward, slashing the knife through the air, but it connected with nothing. The figure dissipated like smoke, only to reappear at her side, closer than before. Suddenly, the front door burst open, a blinding beam of golden light cutting through the darkness. She shielded her eyes, squinting through her tears as a silhouette stepped into view. It was an elderly woman, draped in a heavy cloak, holding a glowing, gnarled staff. "Emma!" The woman's voice rang out, calm but firm. "Get away from it!" The figure recoiled from the light, hissing and screeching, its form flickering like a dying flame. The shadows writhed violently, trying to escape the golden glow. The elderly woman struck the ground with her staff, and the room filled with a blinding pulse of light. The creature howled, its body twisting and shrinking as if being consumed by the brightness. Emma fell to the floor, the knife clattering from her hands. She looked up at the woman, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her grandmother knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I told you never to break the seal," she said softly, her eyes filled with both sadness and resolve. Emma turned toward the mantel, where the shards of the snow globe lay still. The faint glow that had once emanated from them was now gone, leaving only cold, lifeless fragments. The creature let out one final, piercing screech before disintegrating completely, leaving behind nothing but a faint wisp of black smoke. The oppressive darkness in the room lifted, replaced by a heavy stillness. Her grandmother helped her to her feet, and the two women stepped out into the cold night air. Snow continued to fall gently, the first light of dawn beginning to color the horizon. As they walked away, Emma glanced back at the house one last time. Its windows were dark and lifeless, but in one of the panes, she thought she saw the faint glimmer of red eyes staring back at her. She blinked, and it was gone.